PseudoPod is extruded into this universe from a dimension of purest fear. It's beautiful in its own alien way, but what's to come will unsettle you. PseudoPod, episode 678, December 6th, 2019. This week's story, The Boy Who Killed His Mother by Rosemary Hayes. Hello everyone, welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alistair, your host, and this week's story comes to us from Rosemary Hayes. Rosemary is an Australian writer who has had over 550 short stories published around the world, including places like Australia, the UK, America, South Africa, Sweden and Norway. Her first supernatural thriller ebook, Evil Lives, is available now under the byline RM Hayes. She loves writing stories of all genres, including thriller, crime, mystery and supernatural. Most of those could be classed as tame, but occasionally stories that are darker and grittier find their way to the page, such as this one. Your reader for this piece is Heath Miller. Heath is an actor from far away who currently finds himself living on an island off the coast of Maine with 2 cats, 1 human, 1 feline, an improbably fluffy dog, and 6 chickens. You can find his narration at audible.com, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Podcastle, and elsewhere. For photos of the aforementioned animals and other everyday minutiae, follow him on Twitter at VeryHeathMiller. But before that, get ready, because we have a story for you, and we promise you, it's true.
The Boy Who Killed His Mother by Rosemary Hayes. Narrated by Heath Miller. Nobody wanted to play with the boy who killed his mother. Nick Metcalf understood why, in the same way he understood why the sun rose and set. Comprehension was simple for 6-year-olds. Things just were. So even though he accepted, the other kids in his class avoided walking too close to him, in case they caught whatever made him a bad boy, or whispered when he walked past, "That's him. He killed his own mother." That didn't mean he liked it. He didn't. Not one little bit. One time Nick arrived at school to find "Killer" written on a sheet of paper and left on his desk, as if whoever left it thought he needed reminding of the day his world collapsed around him. Maybe he did. If by some miracle he forgot his crime, he might start to think he was just like everyone else. For endless seconds he stared at that word, scrawled with red crayon, knowing the way the sun rose and set. This was his label for the rest of his life. If he was meant to have a different label before he killed his mother, doctor, lawyer, president, it shattered, the way his mother's skull shattered when the bullet entered her forehead at close range. Nick knew the kids meant to be mean by leaving that note, but it didn't faze him. "I'm not a killer," he thought. With a million pairs of eyes watching him, he scrunched up the note and walked to the small garbage bin at the front of the classroom and tossed the paper in. When he turned around, passive and unsmiling, he scanned the silent room, but none of the pairs of eyes met his own. If they thought to get a reaction out of him, they were wrong. This was nothing compared to what his older brother did. Since the day their mother died, Xander hated him. His brother, older by 4 years, made it his job to punish Nick whenever he could for her absence. Nick tried to hide, run, make himself invisible, but it didn't work. Each time Nick would yell out, "I'm sorry," through tears and pain as Xander punched and kicked him. One time, Xander twisted his arm so hard behind his back, Nick screamed and waited for the snap of bone. Only the early arrival of their father from work saved Nick's arm that day. When Peter Metcalf walked in and saw his boys, red-faced, sweat-sheened, breathing heavily, His half-uttered greeting turned into an eardrum-splitting bellow. First, he picked Nick up off the floor. Then he stared at them. After a minute, maybe less, he turned away, picked up the remote control for the TV, and sunk into his armchair. The air hissed out of the worn cushions, or it could have been a sigh from his father. Nick wasn't sure which. To him it seemed the once big man had deflated, crumbled, like the cakes their father tried to make from Mum's faded handwritten recipes. Nick blamed himself, of course. By killing Mum, he had killed his dad, too. "I didn't mean to do it," Nick wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. Would it be the truth? He hoped he didn't mean to kill his mum, but he didn't remember much about what happened. He was barely 3 at the time. What he thought of as real memories were few and brief, like flicking through TV stations. Bright lights, his mother's face, first smiling, then eyes growing wide, mouth dropping open, a cold weight in his hands, an explosive crack. Was he upset? Or angry with her beforehand? He didn't know. Most of what had happened that day he knew from conversations overheard or discussed in front of him. Accident, they said. A man with fat cheeks and bad breath used to try to make him talk about it. His dad drove him to visit the man every week for 3 years. And when Nick didn't talk, the man gave him paper and crayons. "Draw what happened, Nick." Nick drew a stick Mum lying on the ground in their house. He coloured her hair with red crayon, even though her hair was black. He coloured her face red, and her dress and the floor beneath her. Next to her sat a little stick boy, holding the handgun he found in his mum's bag. The smelly man would put a hand on his head and pat him like a dog. Good. It wasn't good. Nick wanted to forget what he did, but no one would let him. From 6 to 16, the label followed him, even though his father moved them 7 times. Different suburbs, different schools. Yet every new place, his reputation reached the school gates before he did. He always wondered how, but when he arrived home, he only had to glimpse Xander's hostile eyes to know the answer. "There's the boy who killed his mother," teenagers whispered in the halls when he walked by. All he wanted was to be anonymous, to learn and study, to have a friend, to have a different label. He had been at the latest school 3 months, pretending being an outsider didn't matter, when a gangly teenager with blackheads peppered across his nose stepped beside him as he walked home. "Hi, I'm Jacob. I've seen you around." Nick glanced at him, quickened his pace. He had seen Jacob around too, always alone or getting picked on. An outsider, like him. "I've heard about you," said Jacob. "Let me guess." Nick's voice was monotone. "There's the boy who killed his mother." Jacob sniggered. "Yeah, guess you hear them all bleating about you. Bunch of idiots." Nick flicked his long hair from his eyes, glanced again at the teenager. Lank blonde hair, pale skin. He was grinning at him. Unexpectedly, a grin tugged his own lips wide. "Yeah, bunch of idiots." From that day, Nick started spending time at Jacob's place, mostly playing computer games or listening to music in the room with a single mattress on the floor and musty blankets covering the cracked windows. He lived with his grandmother, who always smelt of sour wine, smoke, and lavender, so strong Nick wanted to gag. But he put up with it because he finally found a friend. He turned a blind eye to some things Jacob did too, like breaking windows of derelict buildings, pulling the legs and wings off live bugs he caught crawling on his mattress, or pinching his grandmother's cigarettes. They weren't always just tobacco, either. Ever had pop before? Jacob lit the joint, as fat as Nick's thumb. Nah. Your gran really smokes that stuff. As often as she can get it. Jacob sucked in, held his breath for an eternity before pursing his lips to release the smoke directly into Nick's face. Don't knock what you haven't tried. Go on. He held out the joint. Nick took it, inhaled briefly. Jacob laughed. Not like that. Breathe deep. Hold it. Nick tried, coughed, waved the smoke from his eyes. Think I'd rather drink. Yeah? Wait here. Nick waited. The game controller beckoned. He killed 100 aliens before Jacob came back into the room with a curse, holding up an empty wine bottle. She can't have it in the house for more than a minute before she has to drink the lot, he fumed. Nick shrugged. He didn't want to drink anyway. He saw what it had done to his dad over the years. He drank to forget. He drank to remember. When his words slurred and his eyes turned bloodshot, he'd find Nick and talk about Mum. Those red eyes would fill with tears, regret, accusation. I didn't mean to do it, Nick would think as he helped his stumbling father into bed. I'm not a killer. They smoked the rest of the joint. Jacob, mostly. Nick didn't feel any different and told his friends so. You're not doing it right. Or you don't want to do it right. Nick stayed silent. Massacred more aliens. Hey, I know where to get some booze. Jacob pulled the controller out of Nick's hands. Come on. I was only joking before. I don't want to drink. It's illegal. Jacob's red eyes peered at him. So's smoking pot. So's killing someone. There it was. Again. Nick's stomach twisted. Where's this booze? He said, standing up. Moonlight and artificial light illuminated streets leached of colour. Jacob bounded away like a pup, eager to find its first pole to pee on. Nick zipped his jacket and let his hair fall over his eyes, following Jacob along a half-dozen blocks crammed with houses tired of standing, until they reached a park that hardly ever heard the squeals of children anymore, unless it was squeals of pain. Under an oak tree, Jacob approached a pile of rubbish. Boxes, a blanket, dirty clothes. Then the pile moved. Hey, old man, Jacob said merrily as he approached. You've got something of mine. The man pressed his most prized possession against his chest. A bottle of whiskey. Go away. Not till we get what's ours. Nick grabbed Jacob's arm. Leave him alone. With a yank, Jacob pulled his arm free. In a minute. He walked forward, crouched in front of the shrinking man. Hand it over. When the man didn't oblige, Jacob stood, then swung his leg in a sideways arc. His foot connected with the side of the man's ribs. Jacob, no! Don't say my name, stupid! Jacob rounded on him. And what do you care? This thing's a piece of shit, just like everyone else around here. You don't know what shit is until you've tasted it. Something in Nick's tone, or maybe it was the expression on his face, made Jacob stare warily at him. Let's go. Nick stepped backwards. Now. The choice spun in Jacob's eyes, like a slow-mo flipping coin. With a sniff, a wipe of his nose with the back of his hand, he turned his back on the fetal-curled man clutching his glass umbilical cord. Jacob had to jog to match Nick's speed as they crossed the park. "I'm not thirsty anyway," Jacob said. "But man, I am fucking hungry." Back at Jacob's place, they raided the pantry. Chips, Oreos, Twinkies. Jacob ate most of it. They shot aliens, listened to music, joked, laughed. Only later, back in his own bed, staring at a ceiling lost in gloom, did Nick feel the anger swell. Why did Jacob have to do that? Sometimes he could be a real jerk. But he was his only friend. His own father wasn't even a father, let alone a friend. His brother, well, he learnt long ago Xander was his enemy. How many bruises, how many cuts, how many times had he thought a bone was about to break before he realized that? To be honest, it wasn't the fights that made him face that fact. It was the shit. The day he turned 11 had been a rare, good day. The cake his dad baked was edible. An aunt and uncle had visited and brought candy. They took him to the movies to watch a comedy. Nick didn't remember ever laughing that much. In fact, he didn't think he had ever laughed at all up until then. But the best part was when his dad gave him his present, a 10-speed bike. Brand new. Even Xander didn't have a 10-speed. That night he went to bed forgetting, for the first time, he was the boy who killed his mother. Dawn had barely started to sieve through the thin curtains when 11-year-old Nick's consciousness stirred. The first thing that struck him was the smell. Invasive, repulsive, instantly recognizable. A split second later, he realized his mouth was full of shit. He sat up, spitting, gagging. When a slimy piece fell from his mouth onto his blanket with a plop, he vomited. Again and again, until his eyes streamed with tears, and his stomach brought up nothing but bile. Then he heard the laughter, and a form loomed from the corner and stood before him. "Don't ever forget," Xander said. "You're nothing but a piece of shit." Even now, all these years later, Nick could still taste it. For the next few weeks, he continued to go over Jacob's house after school and at the weekends. Neither of them mentioned that night in the park. They spoke about the latest games, the best weapon to use in an inevitable zombie apocalypse, the girls at school. "Macy Myers is the prettiest girl in school," Nick said, one warm Saturday afternoon. In other parts of town, you might hear lawnmowers humming or hedge trimmers buzzing. Laughter. "She's a bitch. So's that best friend of hers, Amy Fatass. They look at us like we're specimens in a pea jar." "They're okay." Jacob glared at him. "They don't even go near you, just like everyone else. Doesn't it make you mad? Makes me mad. Everyone thinking they're better than us." "When I leave school, I'll get away from them all." "Where you plan to go?" "Probably a big city, miles from here, where nobody knows me, or will ever know me." Gunfire, screams, and dying aliens were the only sounds for ages, until Jacob said, "What was it like?" "What was what like?" "Killing someone." A mass of squirming worms appeared in Nick's stomach. He could taste shit. "Don't ask. Ever." "Sure," Jacob shrugged. "But you know me. I won't knock something till I've tried it." "What's that supposed to mean?" Jacob leaned back and reached into the gap between the mattress and the wall. When he straightened, he held a rifle in his hands. "Where'd you get that?" Nick's heartbeat throbbed in his chest, throat, ears. He tossed the controller away and stood. "Found it under Gran's bed the other day when she was passed out, and I was looking for some cash. Think one of her exes must have left it behind when he dumped her." "Is it loaded?" Jacob grinned. Oh, yeah. He put the butt against his shoulder, aimed the barrel at the TV, hooked his finger around the trigger. So what do you say, Nicky boy? Let's blow this town, after we've had some fun? What sort of fun? He lowered the rifle onto his lap, smiled. Thought I'd open my window, play a little shooting gallery game. Want to play? You're joking, right? Jacob stood, crossed the small room, yanked down the blanket covering the window with his free hand. Dust motes swirled in sepia-toned sunlight, turning the room into a giant snow globe. I thought you'd want to join me. We could have turns. Why do you think I wanted to be your friend? You had this planned all along? I dreamt of it all along. I didn't think it was possible until I found the gun. You can't shoot people. Some killer you are. I'm not a killer. Jacob smirked at him, then turned to the window, undid the latch. He tried to open it with one hand. It wouldn't move. He had to lean the rifle against the wall and use both hands. The window screeched a protest. When the gap was wide enough, he poked the muzzle out, leaning the barrel on the sill. Over Jacob's shoulder, Nick saw a mother pushing a pram along an uneven path. A man jogging, earphones trailing over his chest like white worms. A kid, no more than 10, sitting on a front step on the squat house opposite. Jacob aimed at the kid, then tracked the jogger with the rifle. Until the rifle fired the ear-splitting shot, Nick didn't really think Jacob would do it. The jogger fell, screaming, clutching his leg. Did you see that? I got him. Then he lined up the kid again. Nick moved, one arm around Jacob's throat, the other around his chest, and yanked him backwards, the rifle barrel scraping paint flakes into the room as they fell, fought, rolled. Nick ended up with a gun. He stood over Jacob. No more, Nick said. Jacob shuffled backwards on his bottom until he sat on the mattress, his back resting against the wall. Not today, maybe, he said. There's always tomorrow. The police will be here any minute. You'll be arrested. You think? Your prints are on the rifle too, man. I witnessed you stealing Grand's gun, shooting that man. I stopped you. You've killed before. Who you think they'll believe? He sniffed, wiped his nose with the back of his hand. And when you're gone, told you, there's always next time. Nick heard sirens, thought about the kid outside. He'd be sitting on the step another day. Maybe the woman with the pram would walk past again too. Or someone else, minding their own business, going about their day. Just like his mother. He saw her face, her wide open eyes, her mouth dropping open. His body shook. His ears rang. The blood. He didn't remember the blood back then, almost black, but he saw it now, being soaked up by the single mattress on the floor, illuminated by sepia sunlight swirling with dust motes. He saw so much clearly now. A note in childish scrawl. Killer.
The horror you see here is clear. The bored, hormonal angst of teenage boys terrified of whether they want to have sex, with who, what that means for them, and processing their feelings through violence. The Destructors, Rumblefish, It, Donnie Darko, throw a rock in modern literature or culture and odds are it'll land near a kid like Jacob. Angry, frightened, overlooked. Just waiting for the unspeakable thing he wants to do to gouge his name into the world, the cheap, lazy Fox News talking point that sits at the other end of the breakfast table and mumbles about more cornflakes until one day he doesn't. But the subtler horror is only revealed in those final few lines. That's the horror that's so universal it becomes the baseline of the story, the bedrock, the foundation. Nick is denied certainty beyond the very worst kind of it. The knowledge he killed his mother, but not the knowledge of why. Instead, he's left with the cruel, arbitrary barbs of an accident and the blank canvas that provides to others to write whatever they want to call him across it. The bleak self-awareness behind realizing he's functionally killed his father is a great example of that. The horrific punishments his brother hands out another. This is an event that has marked him for life, something he will be defined by forever. But even then, that's not the horror. The horror is when he does the right thing, when he turns Jacob away from the shooting, and Jacob points out that it doesn't matter. He's done anyway. The long unsolved equation of whether or not he's a murderer answered for everyone who matters, and none of them are Nick. He's endured years of unimaginable horror, and the most likely outcome of this situation is years more. The theft of identity by group perception, and from there, the question the story doesn't ask but will a few paragraphs after its end. Why not just lean into it? Insidious, clear-eyed, tragic, profoundly disturbing. Thank you both. Now, earlier this year, the SFWA raised the pro qualifying rate to 8 cents a word. That is not bad news at all. It's long overdue. Trust me, every creative on the planet is basically chronically underpaid, and I can point you at studies for every field that basically covers that. We stepped up to match that. Our donations have not stepped up to match that. We are overextending ourselves because we believe that this is a pay rate which we deserve to be able to offer, and more importantly, our authors deserve to receive. And we've been pushing really hard all year to get our donations up to the point where this is something that we can do. It's been very tough, and I want to thank all our editorial teams for working incredibly hard in getting us as close as we are. And we are close, but we're not there yet. So if you like this story, please, if you can, donate. The best way to help us out is with a subscription, whether it's for $5 a month through Patreon, which gets you access to the audio vault and all kinds of other stuff at higher levels, including merchandising, or whether it's through just subscribing via PayPal, which is locked at the $5 a month, but again, you get the extra audio. Please help out. And if you can't do that, then please write about an episode you loved, tweet a link to it, mention us on Facebook. All those things help so much, and we do need it. Now, we will be back next week when, as now, we will be a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Next week's episode is The Woman Out of the Attic by Gwendolyn Keast and read for us by Rachel Lackey. I'll see you then, and I will leave you with this quote from the one and only Heathers. My teen angst bullshit has a body count. See you next week, folks.
It's a PseudoPod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.